There's a moment in every child's life when they realize something quietly heartbreaking, that the love they're reaching for isn't coming. And before we continue, let me tell you this clearly so you don't click away, because this might be the most important truth you hear today. Some children don't stop asking for love because they stop needing it. They stop asking because they finally accept that no one is listening. That sentence alone has lived inside too many adults who now wonder why they feel the way they do, why they act strong on the outside but feel hollow on the inside, why they crave connection yet build walls that no one can climb. And if this topic hits you in places you rarely let yourself feel, don't go anywhere. Because what comes next is the part you've needed someone to put into words your whole life. A child doesn't stop asking for love suddenly. It happens quietly, over years of waiting. In the beginning, they try everything. They try being loud, expressive, full of life. They hope maybe if they shine brightly enough, someone will notice. When that doesn't work, they try being perfect, becoming the child who gets good grades, who behaves politely, who doesn't cause any trouble. They think that if they can just be the child adults want, then maybe love will appear. But love doesn't come. So they try the opposite. They hide their feelings, they shrink themselves. They become quiet, cautious, afraid of saying the wrong thing. And eventually, they become invisible. Not because they wanted to disappear, but because no one ever turned toward them with the warmth that tells a child, "You matter. I see you." A child who stops asking for love learns to survive instead of receive. They learn to predict moods, to read the room, to stay out of the way. They become hyper-aware of everything: voices, footsteps, tension in the air. Because love wasn't given freely, affection had conditions, and safety depended on the child's ability to sense danger before it arrived. And the saddest part is that the world praises them for it. People say, "Such a mature child," not realizing that maturity wasn't a gift, it was armor. People say they're so independent, not understanding that independence was the result of emotional starvation. People say they never complain, without seeing that silence was the only way to avoid being dismissed or punished, so the child grows. But their heart doesn't grow with them. It freezes in time, stuck in that moment when they realized love wasn't something they could rely on. And here's the quiet tragedy. When children stop asking for love, they don't stop needing it. The need simply digs deeper into their bones, shaping what kind of adult they'll become. Some grow into people who overgive because they don't want anyone else to feel the emptiness they felt. Some grow into people who keep choosing emotionally unavailable partners, not because they enjoy the pain, but because unavailability feels familiar. Some grow into people who push others away the moment they get too close, because closeness feels dangerous when love was once something that hurt them. But before we go further, here is your mid-video hook, because this part matters more than anything I've said so far. Children who stop asking for love never realize that it wasn't their failure. It was the adults who failed them. And if you're watching this thinking the problem was something wrong with you, listen carefully. Children don't earn love. They're supposed to receive it simply because they exist. What happened to you wasn't your fault. And the way you learned to survive wasn't a weakness. It was intelligence. It was adaptation. It was your heart trying to protect you when no one else did. As the child becomes an adult, the world sees someone who looks fine, strong even. But internally, their emotional wiring is shaped by years of silence, They struggle to express needs because they were trained not to have any. They feel guilty for wanting affection because affection once came with consequences. They hesitate to trust, not because they're cold, but because trust was broken long before they understood what trust meant. And when someone finally tries to love them, they don't know how to let it in. They may feel undeserving, they may feel suspicious, or they may feel overwhelmed. Love becomes something they crave deeply, but fear instinctively. And yet, inside them is still the child who once stood at a doorway, waiting for someone to notice. That child never disappeared. They only learned to stay silent. Even now, as adults, they feel the sting of being unheard. They feel a sadness that arrives without warning, a heaviness in moments that should feel light, a loneliness even when surrounded by people. They sometimes look in the mirror and wonder why they can't feel what others seem to feel so easily. And they don't realize the answer is simple. You cannot unlearn years of emotional drought just by growing older. Healing requires acknowledging that the child inside you was not treated the way they deserved. If you relate to this, understand something. Stopping your request for love was a survival mechanism, not a reflection of your worth. You didn't turn off your emotions. You buried them because you had no other choice. And now, as an adult, when your heart aches in ways you can't explain, it's not weakness. It's the return of everything you had to suppress to stay safe. You learned to be strong too early. You learned to numb too young. And now the weight of those suppressed feelings shows up as anxiety, overthinking, emotional distance, or the inability to ask for help even when you're drowning. But here's the truth you need to carry with you. The child who stopped asking for love didn't stop deserving it. That child still needs gentleness, still needs warmth, still needs reassurance that their existence matters, and that healing, as impossible as it sometimes feels, begins the moment you stop blaming yourself for the love you didn't receive. Healing starts when you finally whisper to yourself the words you needed back then. It wasn't my fault. I deserved better. The journey doesn't require you to confront anyone who hurt you. It doesn't require anger or dramatic closure. It starts inside, by understanding that the silence you lived with was not normal, and the strength you built wasn't supposed to be built so early in your life. Healing starts when you allow yourself to want again, to feel again, to ask again. Because your heart is not broken. It's simply been waiting for you to turn toward it the way no one ever turned toward you. And maybe for the first time in your life, someone is finally putting into words what your inner child has been screaming silently for decades. You didn't stop needing love. You stopped believing it was possible for you. But it is. And part 2 will show you how to reconnect with the version of yourself who still hopes, still feels, and still deserves every ounce of love you were denied. There's something I need you to hear before we continue. And don't skip this part, because it might be the line that finally clicks everything into place for you. The child who stopped asking for love didn't disappear. They're still inside you, waiting for the day you finally come back for them. Every adult who grew up emotionally neglected carries this quiet, hidden version of themselves. You may not notice them in your daily routine, but you feel them in the heaviness that shows up when you're alone. In the way your chest tightens when someone shows you kindness. In the way you instinctively say, "I'm fine," even when you're breaking. That isn't your adult self talking. That's the child in you who learned that showing need only leads to being ignored. As you grew older, you might have thought you left that child behind. You built a life, made decisions, handled responsibilities, maybe even achieved things others praise you for. But success doesn't erase childhood wounds. Strength doesn't cancel out longing. And the ache you feel in moments when everything gets quiet, that deep, indescribable loneliness, isn't because you're weak or dramatic. It's because the emotional blueprint you were given as a child taught you to survive without warmth. And now you're trying to live a life that was built on silence instead of support. Adults who stopped asking for love as children often grow into people who don't know how to receive love, even when it's freely offered. They tense up when someone gets too close. They doubt compliments. They assume abandonment. They look for rejection in everything because rejection was more familiar than affection. They apologize too much. They take care of others too intensely. They downplay their needs. They pretend nothing hurts them. All of this isn't personality. It's survival instinct. You learn to stay small so conflict wouldn't find you. You learn to stay quiet so disappointment wouldn't break you. You learn to stop reaching so the pain of being refused would stop cutting you open. And here's the emotional truth most people never talk about. When a child stops asking for love, they start performing for it instead. They become the funny one, the helpful one, the calm one, the problem solver, the peacekeeper. These roles become masks that hide their longing. Over time, the mask becomes so familiar that even they forget what they look like without it. They carry this into their relationships, hoping someone will finally see through the performance and recognize the child underneath. But most people don't. Most people only see the mask because that's all you ever allow them to get close to. But here's where things begin to shift. Healing starts not when someone else finally gives you the love you missed, but when you stop abandoning yourself the way others abandoned you. The moment you turn inward and acknowledge the hurt instead of running from it, something changes. And let me give you the mid-video hook right now, because you cannot drift during this part. You cannot heal the child in you by pretending they don't exist. You heal by becoming the adult you always needed. This one realization becomes the beginning of a new story. A story where you no longer wait for someone to rescue you, but instead learn to show up for yourself in ways no one did when you were small. Imagine that child version of you standing in the doorway, waiting for affection that never arrived. You've walked past them for years, maybe even decades. Healing begins the moment you stop, turn around, and walk toward them instead of away. It starts when you say, "I see you, I hear you. You didn't deserve what happened, and you're safe now." These aren't just poetic words. They are psychological rewiring. They teach your brain that emotional safety can exist, even if you've never experienced it before. You may wonder how to begin. How do you give yourself something you were never taught to receive? The answer is gentleness. You start small with simple acts of care. You honor your feelings instead of shutting them down. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You speak to yourself with kindness, even when every instinct tries to drag you into self-blame. You acknowledge your needs instead of burying them. Over time, these small acts accumulate into something powerful. They tell your inner child that the loneliness is over. They tell them that someone finally stayed, and that someone is you. And as this healing grows, you will notice subtle changes. Relationships will start to feel different. You'll no longer chase the people who give you crumbs of affection. You'll stop trying to earn love through perfection, silence, or sacrifice. You'll stop apologizing for taking up space. You'll start recognizing red flags you once ignored because emptiness had become normal. You'll realize that the affection you once begged for is something you can now give to yourself. And the more you give it, the less you tolerate emotional starvation from anyone else. But the deepest change happens quietly. It happens on a night when you're lying in bed thinking about everything you've been through, and you suddenly feel something unfamiliar. Softness, a gentleness toward yourself. Not the coldness you once carried. Not the numbness you used to rely on to get through the day. But a warmth that almost feels foreign. That warmth is your heart waking up. It's the child inside you realizing that someone has finally come back for them. You may still experience days when the old wounds feel raw. Days when you fall back into silence, when you feel unlovable, when you worry you're too much or not enough. That's okay. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. The child inside you is learning what love feels like for the first time. They're learning trust slowly. They're learning safety gently. You don't have to rush them. You simply have to stay with them. Stay consistent. Stay patient. Stay present. As you heal, something else happens. You begin to understand the people who hurt you. Not to excuse them, but to release them from your chest. You realize they couldn't give love because they didn't know how. They couldn't offer safety because they never learned safety themselves. This understanding gives you peace, not because the pain disappears, but because you no longer carry their limitations as your identity. You stop asking why they didn't love you and start realizing it was never something you lacked. It was something they couldn't give. And one day, you look at yourself, your life, your resilience, your growth, and you recognize the truth that was always hidden underneath the silence. The child who stopped asking for love didn't break, they survived. They adapted. They held on. They protected you until the day you were strong enough to protect yourself. Everything you are today exists because that child endured what no child should have to. You don't owe them shame. You owe them gratitude. So if you feel something heavy rising in you as you hear this, don't push it away. That's the beginning of reconnection. That's your inner child waking up. That's the moment you begin to understand that your story isn't about being unlovable. It's about finally becoming available to yourself. And the beautiful thing is, once you learn how to love yourself, you no longer spend your adulthood searching for the love you missed. You build it, you grow it, you become it. If this spoke to your heart, if you felt seen in ways you haven't before, then don't leave without letting me know. Like, share, and comment below if this touched you or helped you understand yourself a little better.